Good afternoon or good late morning. So, welcome to the plenary session on challenges and opportunities in terms of digital transformation in the MENA economy. Our session today is about one of the main forces shaping our era. And it is an area which the Arab region has been falling behind. So our question will be, what can policymakers do to capitalize on the enormous dividends of the new digital technologies and how to mitigate the risks? So we will be discussing actually a joint ERF UNDP policy report authored by our two distinguished speakers, which I will introduce in a minute. And this will be followed by an equally important discussants. So basically, our main discussion topic is that digital development in the Arab world has failed up to now to have the transformative impact it has had in other regions, where improvements in business climate and connectivity have improved economic activity, while we are still lacking. And so in order to unleash digital transformation in the Arab country, and to avoid falling further behind, we will be discussing what countries can do to rectify the current situation and how to move quicker in terms of digital transformation. We know that the topic is very wide-ranging. It includes impact on inequality and the need to bridge the existing digital divide, a divide that we all witnessed in our countries during the COVID-19 in terms of education, for example. It also addresses the need to invest in human capital, and we have heard this in the parallel sessions and in the plenaries before. And how to promote competitiveness among other priority areas, such as improving governance services and efficiency, e-commerce, modernizing agriculture, financial inclusion. It is really a wide terrain, and I hope that this report will cover it. So it's very interesting that our session now really builds on the sessions yesterday and the parallel sessions. For example, the session with Jeffrey Sachs and the parallel sessions on the survey of firms in Jordan, Tunisia, and Cairo, the parallel session on food security. I felt this issue of digital transformation has been appearing and reappearing. And the main concern is twofold. One is about the impact on inequality, job losses, those who are left behind, and the other is on the potential. The potential for improving government services, the potential for unleashing private sector growth, the potential on the personal level in terms of education and access to health services and other social services. So I hope the panelists will be answering these two main issues. How do we catch up for improved government services, efficiency, private sector competitiveness, and what is holding us back? And on the other hand, how to avoid regenerating inequalities that have been really a persistent development challenge in our region. Personally, I find this topic quite intriguing for development practitioners and for academic researchers. Because in my view, it is an area where quick impact or quick transformation can take place regardless of where the country's development is at any stage. For example, a low-income country can quickly overshoot a middle-income country in one area or another, if you have certain circumstances. I will use one example, and the issue in digital payments. There has been an immense proliferation of digital payments, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa. And my country, Jordan, is still lagging way behind, even though we can claim that the digital infrastructure and the legal framework in Jordan is better. but many countries have reached way beyond, and we are trying to over-regulate the rollout of digital payments. So this is just one example that it doesn't matter where you are today, but it matters the function and the use and the development need. So we have, I will move now to our panelists. We have two keynote speakers. I will introduce them both now so that we will save time and they will talk after each other. We will start with Dr. Mustafa Nabli, and a lot of you know him, but he is a former governor of the Central Bank of Tunisia, former Minister of Planning and Economic Development in Tunisia, and he served as a chief economist in the World Bank for many years, chief economist for the Middle East and North Africa. And he is, of course, an ERF senior fellow. This will be followed by Professor Shahrukh Fardoust, who is from the College of William and Mary at the Global Research Institute. He is also an ERF senior associate and a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. He is also a former director for strategy and operations at the World Bank. So please, Dr. Mustafa, you can start.
You would start.
Okay.
He's my boss.
Thank you very much for the very helpful introduction. We have 22 minutes, I think, Mustafa and I, and it's a very complex presentation. So I would focus only on really long-term trends very quickly, and some focus on the interaction with the global economy. And then Mustafa will go into details of the 8 country case studies, which is, I think, the heart of the study that we did together with a team of very dedicated and knowledgeable economists who happen to be also interested in digital technology. I think one of the most important parts of this research was to find out what is the definition of digital economics and digital technology and its interaction with economics. It's extremely complicated, and there are many, many different types of technology, and it's evolving on a daily basis. So I personally focused on what is happening in the US in terms of definition of digital economy, and there is a big research point going on at the Department of Commerce, Bureau of Economic Analysis. And their latest work, they have a whole very large team working on defining this area, is that as of 2021, $3.7 trillion was the value added of the digital part of the U.S. economy to the overall economy, and that's 10.3% of the GDP in the U.S. And this was about maybe 2 or 3%. Is this working? This was about 2 or 3% of GDP only 7, 8 years ago. So it's increasing at much more rapid rate than the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy grew on average by 1.9% per year between 2016 and 2021, but the digital part of the US economy grew at 5.6% per year. And therefore, this is the way the American government is defining digital. They've divided the economy into 4 segments: infrastructure, which is basically hardware and software. That accounts for 31% of the 3.7 trillion. E-commerce, which is business to business and business to consumers, which is what we deal with on a daily basis. It's Amazon and Uber and etc. That's about 25% of that digital economy. The priced digital services that you have to pay for, which is the cloud computing, telecom, internet, and so forth, accounts for 43%. And the government digital services is still very small, although the entire US economy is connected to the US government, both at federal, state, and local government. I do all my services, getting driver's license, renewed registration, renewed, pay my taxes, everything is done online. I don't deal with anyone anymore. And I get charged for it. There is a service that you have to pay. That said, again, it's frozen. The fastest growing component is cloud computing in the US. And within sectors, the most dynamic sector is financial sector that is digitalizing. It's almost 70% of all investments in the financial sector is going into digital part of the requirement of the business. The key part of in terms of assessing what it would be the impact of this type of technologies for developing countries is to basically recognize the fact that the digital transformation that is taking place is coming out of a nature and a technology that it is general purpose. So it fits all kinds of activities, all kinds of sectors. So it's basically all encompassing. And it could boost productivity if you measure it correctly, because basically you're going to get a lot more than you did before with limited cost or at a lower cost than before. But measuring it is very, very difficult. It has two attributes which makes it risky for welfare of the society. One is that it is very highly labor saving, and the other one is that it is highly skill biased. So continuously, there is a shedding of workers that is going on as soon as digital technologies are introduced. New people are hired, probably much younger and more skilled and fewer. So addressing this type of implication is really a big challenge, not only in advanced economies, but also, I think, increasingly in developing countries, because this is where you need to create new jobs to bring poverty down and increase welfare. The most important aspects of this technology has been summarized in this list that I have provided: the future of work, automation, robotics, and so forth, the financial services, fintech, which has been shown by many researchers that it has positive impact in terms of inclusiveness. Digitalization of government has been extremely effective in OECD countries and some of the emerging markets where they have been successful. It has increased the efficiency of the government, increased accountability of the government. E-commerce has exploded. We are all familiar with it. And then modernization of agriculture, for example, is as one of the, where management of water and fertilizers and everything is digitalized, and a lot of savings have been, can we go to the next slide? Okay. Next slide. Yeah, okay, here is fine. So just very quickly, digitalization use was accelerated very substantially during COVID, but it favored those sectors that could be digitalized. For example, if you were in manufacturing, even in a country like US, which has very advanced digital technology, you couldn't go to factories were closed. But if you were a consultant for the World Bank, you could sit at home and do your work and submit your work by email or do a Zoom meeting and so forth. So highly skilled, what so-called white-collar workers actually benefited from, from this increased digitalization because they could telecommute, save a lot of time. If you go to Washington, D.C. today, downtown is not very active. Many shops have gone bankrupt, many restaurants have closed. There are office buildings that are not used because federal workers and those people who work with the federal government still are telecommuting. So there is not a lot of pressure for people to go back to work. Now, on top of this, we have had, of course, the shock that came from the Ukraine war and the food and fuel crisis, which I don't think benefited digital technology because all economic activities were adversely affected. And then came the very tightening of the monetary policy in the advanced economies to fight the inflation caused by the invasion of Ukraine and perhaps the COVID and the fiscal policies that were implemented to mitigate the risks. 1 minute. Based on the latest projections of the World Bank, by 2024, the GDP of the developing countries would be 6% lower than it would have been if there had not been a COVID shock or a Ukraine war shock. GDP of the developing countries is about $50 trillion, so 6% of that is 3 trillion lower GDP. MENA region in these pictures also indicates that their performance is going to be affected negatively by these developments. Now, one final set of slides I wanted to show you is that the can we go to, I'll tell you where to stop. Go. Yeah, here. Come back. Yeah, thank you. This one shows the average consumption of digital data by country, income groups, and regions. As you can see, Middle East ranks #1 in terms of consumption of data. It is much higher than North America and Europe. And the reason is, this is from the World Development Report of a couple of years ago, that Instagram and Facebook are used much more intensively in the Middle East and North Africa than any other, including North America. And that accounts for the amount of data. Of course, these are per capita data use. It's not gross. Next one, please. Okay. And this one also is a very important piece of information that shows the cost of getting access to digital data, and in terms of the percentage of the GNI per capita spent in using 1 gigabyte of data. And for low-income countries, is almost 8% of the GNI per year is spent on access. Now, of course, doesn't mean that they're actually spending it. This would be the cost. It's an estimated cost that if they were to use it, and probably they can't use it because it's too expensive. But, and you can see for high-income countries, just a fraction. One more slide. Here we are.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sharaf. This is the broad global context. The project on which we have worked with the support of UNDP and the ERF was really trying to look at the going beyond the traditional benchmarking and looking at the potential of the digital economy on the region, on the Arab countries. And the objective is really to understand what's going on in practice. How can we measure, do we have any information on how the digital economy is actually impacting the economies of the region? That was the main objective. Because most of the reports that have been done on the digital economy have been, to my mind, essentially about potential impact. This is what we can gain, what we could gain from digital economy if we do this. And then we have millions and millions of jobs and high growth and all these nice things. But what is happening actually? Is digitalization taking place, and what is its impact? Therefore, in order to do that, we had to benchmark the countries. We have to understand what has been happening in terms of digitalization actually, and then look at the impact in a number of different areas. So in terms of the benchmarking, we looked at the extent and progress of digitalization and looked at the nature, the type of digitalization. These are two main features of the digitalization. I don't have time to go through the details of the benchmarking and the extent and progress. There are many charts, and I will just, but based on the analysis, whether it is using the 2020 data that you find on the report itself, or even looking at the 2022, the most recent data that just came out, broadly speaking, we can distinguish between three groups of countries in the MENA region. GCC is a group that has the same characteristics. Low middle income countries, a bunch of low middle income countries, and then the other countries low income and some of the middle income countries. GCC have a high level and progress in terms of adoption of digitalization. Very high. As high as many of the advanced countries, higher than many of the emerging markets, and so on. The low middle income countries of the region are more like the low middle income countries of the rest of the world. They are not near the most emerging markets. They are very far from the advanced countries, and so on. And then you have a bunch of countries which are really lagging on with respect to every. So high levels, strong progress in the GCC in terms of access, penetration, and so on. This is broad-based, and the low middle income moderate levels, as I said, and slow progress. They're moderate and progressing slowly in this respect. From the other countries, in terms of country studies, we have Algeria, which stands as a case, separate case. It had a lower level in 2022, in 2020. It has improved significantly between 2020 and 2022, but it's still lagging far behind the other Arab region and so on. And then other countries which are included in our list of case studies are really way behind, whether it's Yemen or others. So I would like just look at this one, but I will not spend time. It looks at the GCC, which are in the middle, the highest. You see that they are really high. And then the low middle income countries of the Arab region on the right-hand side, and then you have Algeria at the end. So I don't have time to really to spend on this charts. Okay, go ahead. In terms of the types of digitalization, what kind of really, I would like to point out one point, which is what has been called the Arab paradox by the World Bank. But I think we have really identified it in our report before the World Bank, which is a very dichotomy between the use by the individuals and the use by business. Very strong use, you have seen the data, by the individuals. By individuals means households and individuals using the internet. Very high adoption and use. Very weak use by the business sector and the production sector, and moderate use by the government. And so the issue, seems to be a unique feature of the region. And you can see it from these charts. You look at the colors. You see the blue are the individuals. You see the blue ones are higher, whether it's in GCC, whether in low income, or whether it's in Algeria. And the adoption by businesses is the red one or orange or whatever it is, orange here. Okay. You don't see that in the West, in the advanced countries. It's the other way around. So it's something very, very interesting phenomenon here that adoption by the individuals, the Facebook and so on is reflected, but you don't see the adoption at the level of the business sector. This is a major feature which has really implications for what we are talking about. Now, this leads us to the issue of the impact. Okay, what did we find out about the impact of digitalization in the Arab countries based on the country studies? Okay, so it was a scoping exercise. It was not a systematic collection of data, but it was an attempt to scope what has been happening in the different countries, 8 countries that we have. So I'm trying to summarize here broadly what we found out from these case studies, okay? By looking at the impact on productivity growth, on employment, ICT employment, as well as employment and labor markets in general, about the gender impact, the impact of women and access to women to jobs, the impact on diversification of the economies, including exports, and in terms of inequality and poverty. What do we know? What do we know in terms? Now here I have to say one general observation. Our overall result from all countries that we have very little analysis to understand those issues. Actually, research has been very limited to understand what's happening on the ground. I think we have seen this time in this conference a few papers trying to deal with the issues. We are starting to get some research going, and I hope that by next year we'll have much more. But we know very little. So all of the information is partial, is tentative, and incomplete most of the time. So we have to keep it, and this is the main message to the researchers of the ERF. This is an area where there is a lot of work that needs to be done, and it is open for business. Now, in terms of the overall impact, there is a divergence between what's happening in GCC and the rest, okay? So relatively high significant impact is identified in many of the GCC countries, and much, much lower impact in the non-GCC countries. So that's a broad finding. On the other hand, when I looked again at the change since 2020 to 2022, the recent, there has been no progress in GCC. But we are seeing progress in the low-income countries, in many of the low-income countries. So there is some convergence again taking place. Maybe that's important. And this is illustrated in this change between 20 and 21. You can see it here in terms of change. That's a measure of general impact. This is, I don't know if some of you from the Network Readiness Index, they produce this aggregate index of impact. So it's not looking at any specific activity or indicator, but a broad impact in terms on the economy. Now, looking at the details at the specifics of the economy, productivity growth, almost no knowledge. We practically don't understand much. A piece of information just came out from a paper that we were discussing just 1 hour earlier in a paper, which looked at this, looking at the impact of e-commerce on productivity in 3 countries, Jordan, Morocco, and Egypt. And that paper finds that there is a significant impact in Jordan, but no impact on firm productivity in Morocco and Egypt. That's one new finding. We did not have it in the paper. But this is a new finding from new research based on ERF data and so on. This is important. So this remains really a field of work that we need to look at and research. In terms of the impact on the startup sector and ICT employment, this is a very active area of policy. Policymakers have been very active in promoting startups because and many from the Startup Acts in Tunisia to other initiatives in Morocco, obviously Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf countries. So they are dynamic. So we observe that this issue of startups is really dynamic, and it's very strong in many countries and getting strong in others. But up to now, the size remains limited. It has not been very strong. In terms of the employment and labor markets, most existing studies provide estimates of potential, as I said, and these are ambitious figures, but little work on really actual impact on labor markets. We don't really understand if there's any significant impact on labor market. Even the papers we are discussing earlier today, they're all about productivity and things, but nothing about employment or about labor markets. So this is an area where we are starting to see some effect in some of the GCC countries. Very few effects in low-middle income countries in some technologies, but not really any significant impact or any significant research on this. Fourth, on the effect on the women in the labor markets, there is some emerging evidence that digitalization is having a positive impact on the access of women to labor markets. So this is happening at some levels, not very big, but some significant levels, especially work in the ICT sectors. The impact is small, but accelerating. But the impact is still the big impact is still waiting to be happening. On diversification of exports and services, this is a challenge for our countries, mostly GCC, but the most important diversification happening is the increase in the share of ICT sector in GDP. So this is happening. This ICT sector itself is expanding, is growing, but in terms of the use along the lines that Sharaf was mentioning, etc. Finally, on inequality and poverty, no in-depth research on the impact of digitalization on inequality and poverty in Arab countries or in the MENA regions, whether it is through the channel of the skilled and unskilled labor or through the growth of large versus small firms and so on. So my main message to leave with you is first, the topic is important. We have not been able to identify significant and solid, robust findings about this impact of digitalization. It's still starting. Digitalization itself is still ongoing, even though in the GCC it has advanced very much, a lot, but in the rest it's still emerging. The impact remains to be looked at carefully. A lot of work needs to be done, which means that policy conclusions at this stage are not very difficult or not complex, so I don't want to go into that. You can see it. But really what we need to do now is really understand better what's going on the ground, much better than what we have been able to gather and to understand with this project, and in order to be focusing better the policy conclusions. I think they're not focused enough, to my mind, because we really don't know the weaknesses, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You hear me? Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Nabli, Dr. Fardoust, for opening the door in this report for extremely important and emerging issues that we don't know much about. So I think you have laid the ground for much further research to be done, so that sooner or later, hopefully sooner, you can come back with more concrete policy conclusions. Our next panelist will be a discussant online, Professor Francois Bourguignon, who is I hope he's online. Yes. Yeah, okay. He's the former chief economist at the World Bank, and he has been the director of the Paris School of Economics. And in 2016, Professor Bourguignon was awarded the Dan David Prize. His research focuses on income and wealth inequality, redistribution and tax policy, international trade, trade policy, education, and I think a lot of you here know him pretty well. It's a pity he's not with us physically, but welcome, Professor Bourguignon. You hear us?
Yes, I hear you very well.
Okay. You have 10 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the thanks. I'd like first to thank the organizers of this conference. I've been several times to the ERF conference, and I'm really sorry that I was not able to make it to Cairo this time. I'm also very happy to have to comment on a paper or on a report by my two old dear friends, Mustafa and Sharok. And again, I'm really sorry not to be able to hug them as if I were in Cairo today. First, I would like to congratulate them for this report, which I believe is very important in setting the tone for reflecting on this issue of digitalization and development in the Arab region. Certainly, digitalization is the big event of this last 3 or 4 decades, and without any doubt, it will be the major event of the next decades to come. So to set the stage and to try to understand exactly where those countries in the region stand on this dimension of digitalization is absolutely essential, and it's good to have been able to show what we knew about this and what we don't, unfortunately, what we don't know. And Mustafa in particular has been quite insistent on the fact that more research is needed and more has to be understood on the vast impact of digitalization in the region. And the distinction that he made between potential and real is extremely important in the sense that because the Arab region is lagging slightly behind other regions in terms of digitalization, we have to think about what would be the potential impact of making up for that lag. And at the same time, we have to try to think about what could be the effect of further development and further intensification of digitalization in the region. What I would like to insist upon in a few remarks is first of all on the kind of the uncertainty that is surrounding for the moment the impact of digitalization. Maybe I can, for 1 or 2 minutes, refer to the work which has been done in advanced countries. This work has been quite intensive, unlike what has been the case in developing countries in general. And many economists have tried to figure out exactly what has been the impact of digitalization. The big issue is the fact that it is very difficult to observe with actual data, with precise data, the way in which digitalization is getting in, is spreading within an economy. So that, and this has been the case for all the time since we are studying economic growth and economic changes in productivity, the impact of technological change is essentially residual. This would be fine if we were able to identify very well what is not residual, what is a direct impact due to phenomena that we can observe. In the case of employment, we observe in advanced countries that there's been no big shock, no permanent shock on employment, which is a good thing. Many people were afraid that this would be the case. We observe that there's been a change in the structure of employment, the structure of jobs, with this well-known polarization phenomenon by which middle income or middle earning jobs or what people have considered as routine jobs disappearing at the middle of the distribution in favor of the two extremes of the distribution. We observe that, but at the same time, we know that the skill supply in those economies has changed over time. And this must have been an impact on the type of jobs which are being filled. Second, we know that the economy, the structure of the economy has changed over time, moving more towards some kind of services. This again had an impact on the structure of the jobs. We know that there has been some offshoring, globalization. Many jobs simply went away or were sent away by companies. This had an impact. And finally, we know that trade has changed a lot since over the last 30 years. And this had an impact on the structure of jobs. So in order to identify what is due possibly to digitalization, we have to figure out exactly what is due to at least those four forces that I just mentioned. And this is not easy, which means that it will always be the case that there is uncertainty about the real impact of digitalization. This is also true when we talk about inequality. And of course, we are very concerned by the fact that this technological change may modify inequality, but the kind of conclusion that we reach is exactly the same. And we need indeed to do better in understanding the other components of changes in the structure of jobs and in the structure of earnings in order to truly identify the impact of digitalization. And this is some work which is still going on from my point of view today. The big paradox, as a matter of fact, which I think is important, is that what we don't really understand at all is really the reason why, if digitalization has been so important, why is it the case that labor productivity has started to slow down instead of accelerating because of technical progress? Now, if we move to developing countries, what was observed in developed countries to some extent is reassuring in the sense that maybe there is no big change to be expected in terms of total employment in those countries, given what we observe in the developed countries. And if we look at the structure of jobs, then it is unlikely that the labor saving impact of digitalization will be as strong in those countries as it could have been in advanced countries, basically because labor is cheap and there is much less incentives by companies, by business to substitute technology for labor. So from that point of view, we can be reassured that there might not be a big problem, big loss in terms of employment and some impact on inequality. And at the same time, we observe in advanced countries, as we observe in developing countries, that the externalities permitted by digitalization are truly enormous. Enormous in terms of, as it was emphasized by the two presenters, enormous in terms of the information exchange between people, between business and people, the possibility given to governments to improve enormously their services, to be much more efficient. And today, when we think about trying to improve government services, improve the way in which the society is functioning, it is very difficult to think of another way as through digital mechanisms, through digital devices or digital channels. So from that point of view, there is a huge externality that certainly, and the report is quite right in emphasizing that this must be absolutely harnessed by developing countries to move on. And there is another aspect which maybe would deserve a little more emphasis, which is a positive impact of digitalization in Arab countries and other developing countries on substituting not for the existing labor, but for the missing labor. We may expect that because of artificial intelligence, for example, it will be possible to produce services which otherwise would require skilled people employed in some area, costing money to the government or to the employer, and instead this service will be delivered by the artificial intelligence or by this kind of mechanism. This is a big difference in the sense that in advanced countries, it may be a substitution. In developing countries, it may be a net addition, a net complement to the production process. So, as a matter of fact, I've said at the beginning, there is not very much to be feared in terms of job displacement in developing countries, but more than that, we may hope that some jobs which are not filled for the moment will be filled by the technology. Of course, this means that in the future, this might become a kind of disincentive for people to educate and to be trained in order to get this kind of job, because those jobs will already be taken care of by machines or by algorithms. So things are not completely positive, but I think this is an aspect which is certainly worth stressing. Let me finish simply by emphasizing the societal aspect of digitalization, which I thought that maybe the report could have spent a little more time on. Mustafa was absolutely right, and the Sharaf were both right in emphasizing this is quite interesting when you compare Arab countries and the rest of the world to see that the personal use of digital connection is more important in this region than in others. And it seems to me that maybe, but I am asking the question to the specialists, and certainly Mustafa is one of them, had the feeling that probably the Arab Spring has played a huge role in pushing up this aspect of connection between people. But there is more than that. A few days ago, Elon Musk was interviewed saying there are big dangers for human societies with the development of artificial intelligence. We are told about fake videos on politicians, fake pictures, which are spreading around the net, and very quickly we'll have fake newspaper articles, fake newspapers all the time, all about. And this is extremely dangerous in the sense that maybe because of this proliferation of instruments, of digital instruments, we are losing the information capacity that is necessary for a society to function. So we should not forget and shy away from the problem of societal and non-economic cost of digitalization. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Bourguignon. Thank you for helping us understand better the underlying forces and contextualizing the issues further, both globally and regionally. So now I would like to turn to Dr. Ahmed Ghunaim, who's Professor of Economics at the Faculty of Economics and Political Science in Cairo University. He is a research fellow at the ERF, as well as at the Center for Social and Economic Research at KASE in Poland. He held different policy-oriented positions, also in the Ministry of Foreign Trade in Egypt, and he acts as a consultant to many international organizations like WTO, UNCTAD, and UNDP. He holds a PhD of economics, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. Let me start by an impression I had from Mustafa, and I thank him and Sharouk for this excellent presentation. I felt that Mustafa was a little bit disappointed in the sense of that he was expecting to have more concrete general policy implications, and he was kept repeating that there is a room for more research, we need more research, as if that he was not, with Sharouk, able to identify specific issues. And on the contrary, I feel that very positive to me because I think we need to understand a lot about the issue of digitalization and its impact in the region. And let me start first by reading something I read 2 days ago from the New York Times, from the godfather of the AI, artificial intelligence, who is leaving Google. And he said, I'm quoting here, "It is hard to see how you can prevent the bad actors from using it for bad things," he said. And then they concluded the article by saying, concerns. Since OpenAI released the new version of ChatGPT in March, hundreds of technology leaders and researchers have signed open letters warning of the risks of AI or calling for a 6-month moratorium on the development of new systems because the AI technologies pose profound risks to society and humanity. That's the founder of the AI and his impression. And here comes to me the issue of, are we ready in the MENA region to adopt and utilize digitalization in the right way or not? And there are several issues. I'll just focus on 3 or 4 issues. For example, again, Mustafa mentioned the issue of dichotomy. And he mentioned the issue of dichotomy regarding business versus individual. And I was thinking, how can we measure such a kind of thing? I was just watching the audience here when I was sitting, and I found that a lot of people are on their mobiles. And if we take it in the context of this session, then definitely what he rightly said, that this business is not being used the right way, and they're doing it for individuals. But maybe they're focusing on some work for them, not related to ERF and the plenary session that we're in. So again, this dichotomy is very difficult to identify, very difficult to know, and how they measure it is another issue. The other dichotomy that is really important, and it's of great importance when he mentioned the issue of GCC and how they are advanced relative to other parts, is the issue of the dichotomy services versus manufacturing. He mentioned that the impact of on manufacturing or productivity is not that high, and this links to the issue that we can use it more in the context of GCC specifically and the other areas in the region in services. So the issue of servicification and the future of servicification in the region, and I believe there is some kind of dichotomy in this regard. Another issue that has not been mentioned, but I believe it's of great importance in this region, is the dichotomy between security and freedom. Again, this is an issue when it comes to digitalization, and with the security concerns in this region, then it definitely would affect a lot of businesses and a lot of concerns in this regard. Another dichotomy that we need to take into account is the issue of short-term versus long-term. So far, most of the reports all over the world are focusing on how to make use and the productivity impact in the short term. But I believe that, as the last sentence mentioned, the impact of AI on humanity is an issue that we need to take into account. It's not an economics business alone. There are so many aspects that need to be taken into account, and especially again in this region to have a fruitful kind of results. Just moving to another aspect is the issue of, and I'll be a little bit skeptic here. We always focus, again, in this region specifically, on coverage versus utilization. And we build our results based on the coverage, how good it is, and then we measure the utilization. But I believe that I would add another element, which is the working coverage. So we need to differentiate between coverage and what is functional. Because in many regards, it's not working the right way. If the coverage is not working the right way, simply because we have a weak internet signal, Wi-Fi is not working well, I would give just a very simple example. If the simple means of technology would be using ATMs and online banking instead of going to the bank. And the issue is to have less transaction costs and enhance the productivity of people. But what happens, and this happens a lot to my wife, that her card is eaten by the ATM machine. Then the punishment for that is you'll probably have to spend 3 months waiting for the card to come. So definitely, for me, I would spend 1 day going, as losing one day of transaction cost, then staying 3 months, and the issue of fearing that I will lose my ATM card and it will be eaten is another issue. So there is a kind of, I would say, avoiding the use of technology just to avoid. So we need, again, here to include many elements as the issue of working coverage. Finally, we need to identify, is it really better to have inefficient technology and work with it, or just to avoid it completely and do it the old ways, how our parents and our grandparents did? I believe part of the reluctance to adopt technology the right way in this region is the issue of the inefficient technology that we're having, or the incomplete coverage that we're having. And hence, a lot of research is needed in order to be able to identify whether digitalization can help a region like ours, or we should adopt digitalization as a way and just we're not able to avoid its negative consequences. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed, and for bringing up also the issues of the existing dichotomies and the issues of coverage and inefficiencies. And I think our personal trepidation to change ourselves. You were the first one to suggest this. So now we move to our final discussion before we open the floor to Ms. Paola Pagliani, who's a regional program coordinator with UNDP, and who has a demonstrated history of working with international organization, and who is a skilled policy analyst with extensive experience in adaptive results-based management. I hope I did this correctly. It's from the internet. Please, okay. Paola.
Thank you very much. And let me start, first of all, by thanking ERF for this collaboration on a paper that I think has really add value and has helped spearhead a long series of research in this field, which I agree is very much needed. Way from being complete, and probably it will never be completed. But I think, the work that you have done has definitely been a milestone for the region, and looking forward to keep also working together and the additional research that is coming. From my side, I have to say that as mentioned before by Mary, the topic came up very frequently yesterday and during the discussion and the special sessions today. So I'm not really have the ambition to add knowledge, research, or anything. I will just try to paste together some of the elements that have come up and also provide you with the perspective from which the UN, and specifically UNDP, my organization, is approaching the topic of digital transformation. So first of all, I would like to say that digital transformation we have seen has been defined as an ever-evolving range of technologies that impact all aspects of our world. But I would like to say it's also an issue of the mindset. It translates into the way we work, it translates into the way we socialize, and eventually it can enable people and institutions to innovate together with technology their way of functioning. So, as mentioned by several examples, I don't think that the impact of digital technologies in our lives can be understated. It's there, it's pervasive. I think we have all experienced it. But I would also like to emphasize that we should not assume that is the only or the main source of the changes that we're witnessing today. I remember that for years the 2011 uprising in this region were defined as the product of social media interaction. I think, and it has also been discussed yesterday, we are very much aware that the root causes was a broken social contract in the region, which is still persistent, and that people would find a way to organize themselves even if social media were not available. Still, we have to take into consideration that was a tool that they used. We have also been told, and this is coming up very often in the past few months, that digital finance can provoke like a very fast spiraling on banking crisis and global crisis. And it is true that now, unlike just a few years ago, there are millions of people that can just withdraw all their savings in a few seconds. We're talking about seconds, while just like a few years ago, it would have taken weeks at least. And these weeks would have given time for policymakers to react, theoretically. But we also know that the banking crisis now, like in 1929, are still mostly caused by the type of regulations that are supporting the banking system. At the same time, I mean, we see that we have seen that the rapid adoption of digital technologies has been accompanied also by a rapid increase in inequalities worldwide. And it is true that there is like a connection between the inequalities we are seeing today and the way digital technologies are managed and the way they are capitalized on. But it's also true that inequalities mostly depend on the possibility to access resources and also on distributive policies that are put in place way more than the technologies itself. So my point here is simply that if we want to understand the impact of these technologies, I think that we need to study it in the interconnection between the technologies and a whole other set of factors that are influencing the way they affect us. The other point that I wanted to make is that as I guess most of the technologies out there, digitalization cannot be considered like a magic wand that helps us like solve all our problems or a terrible evil. In most of the cases, it's ambivalent. We have seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, and it has been mentioned several times, that the quick adoption of digital solutions has a lot of advantages in the way we tackle education, work, and all that kind of things. At the same time, during the same period, we have seen that those that were not connected were unavoidably left behind by this type of solution. At the same time, we know that digital transformation can make public administration more efficient, more transparent, more accountable to their citizens, but this is coexisting with the fact that this is also exposing citizens to enhanced surveillance and all set of privacy violation. And again, these two things are intrinsically related. My last example here is, it was like extensively discussed during the paper presentation and this morning. It's unavoidable that digital disruption will destroy a number of jobs the way we know them today. At the same time, it can create new jobs and new ways of working, including more sustainable ways of working. A point that was made, I think, by Dr. Adel Ben Youssef yesterday about the needs to combine the two big transitions we need to undertake, the ecological and the transition one. So basically, I think, the point that I want to make here is just that the way digital technologies will impact and affect our lives mostly depends on what we do with them and, of course, the type of policies that get implemented in this area. So I would recommend that we shift from either like a techno-optimism or like the anticipation of a techno-apocalypse to something that we as the UN would like to promote as a right-based approach that put digital inclusion as a first principle to address digital transformation. So there is a roadmap laid out by the UN Secretary General that is like evolving around like a few principles. The first one is the idea of achieving universal connectivity as like the main point to make sure that digital inclusion works for all. And this, of course, requires an emphasis on the poorest, the most vulnerable, those that are more easily left behind and that cannot access this kind of technology. The other idea is to promote digital public goods that can help create a more equitable work. And I think that supporting global cooperation on issues like artificial intelligence, again, mentioned multiple times and becoming even more prominent this year, in the past few months, is one of the key issues when you talk about digital public goods. Then there is an issue of protecting human rights in the digital era. digital technologies as created and determined new and different kinds of human rights violation, and possibly also the need to define new and specific digital human rights. There is, of course, the issue of promoting the security of the digital environment and linked to that the trust in the digital environment, and also the need to build a more effective architecture for digital cooperation as digital transformation has advanced way more quickly than the capacity of the institution to enable this kind of cooperation. And also, already mentioned several times, the need to enhance digital capacities so that everybody can benefit from it. Now, just a quick reflection on, based on the work that UNDP is doing on digital transformation in the region. We have already seen that the critical challenges here are the digital divides within the countries, being it gender, rural, urban, age, and so on. But also mentioned very well and covered very well in the paper, the divide between the countries in the region. And here, I know that several of you refer to this region as the MENA region. Apologies for UNDP, it's the Arab state region, so I'm focusing on Arab states. But as emerging from the paper, I mean, this divide between the Gulf countries that have adopted digital technologies extremely fast, a very high level, middle-income country that, as Mustafa said before, sorry, are basically lagging behind similar countries elsewhere, and the least and developed countries and crisis countries where basic infrastructure is not present. So I just wanted to say that this is creating an opportunity, if we want, to transfer knowledge, but at the same time, it's also like a bottleneck to the kind of regional cooperation in this area that was advocated for yesterday, and that I would agree it's very important.
Thank you.
Can I just make one final point? I will not go through foundation systemic barriers. We heard about them. I would just advocate that from our perspective, what is needed now is to move from the current landscape of digital solutions that are implemented through fragmentic and opportunistic approaches to a strategic and whole of a society digital ecosystem. And this is what we would like to look for. So that is encompassing infrastructure, regulations, the digital governance, as well as the business needs, and finally, the needs of people in terms of enhancing their skills, their culture, but also their digital well-being. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paula. Thank you for introducing the rights-based approach and for enlightening us on the approach of UNDP on this issue. So we have around 15 minutes of discussions. We will start by having one round and then see how much time we have. Hopefully we will have 2 rounds. So we can start over there. We'll take a few questions at a time, and I give you an opportunity to please introduce yourself, and if your comment is directed to anyone in specific.
Okay, thank you very much. Amira Al-Haddad, Professor of Economics and Senior Economist at the German Institute of Development and Sustainability. I have 3 comments. The first comment pertains to what Dr. Ahmed mentioned, is called the working coverage. And there are underlying reasons. For instance, I've done research on the regulatory reform in telecommunications for ERF about 10 years ago. And the evidence showed that the National Telecommunications Regulatory Authority, there was evidence that there is regulatory capture, where it protects the national incumbent. And that way, the national incumbent that is actually a monopolistic, so all the providers have to rent the service of that incumbent to access the network, has very limited incentive to expand the infrastructure, the IT infrastructure, because it is so protected by the regulatory authority itself. That's the first point. The second point is also in Egypt, the army has a large control over the bandwidth, which allows how much data can be transferred, which means that it limits the usage of the bandwidth for services, and that in turn affects the working coverage for business, for personal use, etc. The third comment is about evidence on the effect of telecommunication on Egyptian firms. My co-author and I have published recently a paper that actually showed a different evidence from the paper that Dr. Nabli mentioned. In fact, firms that are using information technology were less likely to be affected by the COVID pandemic. They were less likely to lay off workers in the manufacturing sector. And I think the results this morning have to do with the fact that we used the data set that was launched the day before yesterday here in the ERF, the Egyptian Industrial Firm Behavior Survey, which is a large data set that allows more rigorous, so in Egypt, actually, the use of information technology for firms in the manufacturing sector has proved to be great and saved them, and the paper is called Storm Survivors, so they actually did survive the storm of COVID. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please, and then there.
Thanks. About 2 weeks ago, Paul Krugman in the New York Times mentioned that one of the reasons why the ICT is not showing in productivity is because it takes time. And he drew the example from electricity. It took almost 100 years before electricity began to show its impact. In the beginning, it just replaced the steam engine, but it had to depend till it got to the toothbrush before it showed things. So to some extent, we have to be patient. But I think he missed two things, and some of which the panelists and the commentators have brought up. One, computers are everywhere except in productivity. It's like a black hole. To a great extent, it has not shown its impact. And one of the major reasons why it hasn't, because most of this digitalization is in the services. And services is extremely difficult to measure productivity. Some of the measures are actually reversed in the sense that if you use a particular GPS or things that reduces the amount of time you spend on moving from one place to the other, it may have really ended up reducing the impact on output and how it measures. The other aspect, which is also important, is the fact that to a great extent there are forces within the economy and nature. For example, electricity did not go into an electric car till now. It's just about very recent it came in. And one of the major reasons people have brought up is that the big companies have not been willing to discard their ICE, internal combustion engine, and there were forces that had prevented these technologies from being used.
We're going to take 3 more questions, there, and there, okay? And then maybe you would like to comment?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Olugbenga Ojubanire from Euromed Business School in Morocco. I'm actually doing my PhD on digital transformation of industrial enterprises in Africa. And so I would like to comment a little bit and maybe ask a question about the difference between individual adoption and business adoption of digital transformation. I would like to think that adoption of digital technologies at individual level is just a question of perceived ease of use, perceived benefits, some hedonic motivations and other things. And it's more like just digitizing what you do personally, which is not so much of a problem. And usually most of these are along social media and all of that. But for businesses, it is a lot more complicated because in this case, you have to look at your supply chain. You have to look at your business environment. You need to look at the cost, benefit analysis, and some other things. And I like to say, Professor Jeff Sachs yesterday said we are in a world run by engineers who knows nothing about economic and social implications of what they are creating. So for the industrial enterprises, the speed of digital transformation is very much higher than the speed of adoption, and especially in Africa. So we have businesses trying to grapple with one innovation, and before they could understand the use, there is another one coming out. So it leaves Africa with the issue of playing catch up with industrial transformation and digital transformation. The second issue I see with adoption of digital technology from businesses is the skill gap. So as part of my research, I have to interview people in businesses, in the education and research, as well as policymakers. And one thing that kept coming up with my interview with people in business is, how do we get the people to actually use these technologies? And those who have these skills are what I call Europhilic or Afrophobic. So they acquire these skills in Africa, and they get work experience from companies in Africa, and then they move to bigger enterprises in Europe. And these continue to leave the businesses with the challenge of, are we actually ready to transition to a digital enterprise, or to really transform digitally in these areas? So I would think that the cost of skill acquisition, the cost of retention, the cost of reskilling, and the adequate ecosystem for the businesses to actually exist or to transform digitally is being a major challenge in the region.
Thank
you. I'll end with just one question. Is the question of data issues for industrial enterprises. I want to know if the research captures any issue in terms of data and data privacy issues and data access issues for digital transformation for the businesses in the region. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So there, and then.
Thank you. Ariane Han, I work for IDRC. I'm slow in technology, innovation, and uptake. In preparation for my question, I used ChatGPT, and I have the answer to why it's not improving productivity. If we had used ChatGPT to present the data that was presented, we could have gone to lunch half an hour ago. Or most likely what we would have done, we would have extended the discussion anyway. The question that I put in ChatGPT and the encouragement, and I wanted to make that comment in the earlier session, is that it would be wonderful to have better analysis, presentation of the impact of digitalization on women's empowerment, and there we see a lot of immediately see a lot of the answers to the questions about the impact of digitalization, because what the research shows is two things. One, digitalization is not one thing. It can, and in terms of that you see in women's empowerment, platform work can be incredibly empowering for women, because if they are taking care of have responsibility for the household, that allows them better to develop economic opportunities, mixing the two. The digital platforms also are an incredible tool to further exploit vulnerable women, because it allows household work, for example, to be planned for 2 hours, where previously it was for half a day. So I think it's really important that we pay attention to gender differences, first of all. That once we do that, we see that technology by itself will not predict anything, almost nothing about the outcomes, and that in itself also probably tells you, if you look at the ChatGPT answer about whether digitalization improves women's economic empowerment, gives you a lot of the answers, because the answer is quite simply, it depends.
Thank you so much. And the final question? Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm Klaus Schmidt-Hebel from Chile. Fascinating topic. I have two issues or comments for the wonderful presentation by Mustafa and by Sharoch. One has to do with point I would like to elaborate, which was put forward by Atif. He's absolutely right. Time is at the essence of any productivity measurements. Remember, 30 years ago, almost exactly, MIT published the most extensive study on the effects of computers on productivity, overall and labor productivity. And the result was basically no measurable effect on productivity. This was obviously before the internet, before cell phones, before laptops, and before personal computers. But computers have been introduced in the 50s, and from the 50s to the mid-80s, the effect found on the US economy was found to be close to nil. Something like this could happen now too. Obviously, subsequent measures have found massive improvements in productivity, labor productivity in developed countries. My second point has to do with the difference between gross productivity effects and net effects. Why? Because there may be some costs or some deleterious effects on productivity. Think about mental health of young people overexposed to screens and technical devices and games on their telephones and computers, and people who are 8, 15, 16, or 20 hours per day locked to their devices. Think about distraction effects of many workers whose productivity is negatively affected because they use all the time the device instead of selling stuff.
Our time is out, so just.
So I would like to ask you to think about, or if you thought about it, how to measure and differentiate also gross from net effects on productivity, taking into account the effects of time.
Thank you so much. So I think I will give the authors an opportunity to answer, 2 to 3 minutes each, and the commentators, should you wish to reflect on any of the questions and the comments.
Hello? Since many of the questions concern productivity, I just would like to brief you on the latest research that is being done on the US economy, because that is a big puzzle for the Americans, because digital is such a big part of their economy and is becoming a big part of their politics as well. The latest work by Department of Commerce, Bureau of Labor's Economic Analysis, and the US Fed. There are 2 major studies that have been conducted, and they show that it's a huge mistake to look at aggregates. You have to go sector by sector because production functions are very different. And once you do that, and once you try different production functions, all of a sudden you will see significant productivity increases that have taken place. On average, out of let's assume 2% labor productivity growth over the past 10 years. About 1 percentage point of that is due to technology, digital. So almost explains half of labor productivity. But if you look at the different sectors, in several, it's near zero, like real estate or transportation. It's very small or negligible. But in other areas that are fast expanding, in consulting, in financial sector, and as I said, it's very difficult to imagine what is the productivity of financial sector, but it depends on the cost and benefit of that enterprise. Anyway, so it differs, and it could be significant.
I think thank you for all of the comments, and they're very useful and interesting. What I would like to is really, I would like to support the idea that as we go forward from now on, and digitalization is very broad actually. using digitalization concept itself. The technologies are varied. There are many technologies, and the way they are adopted is very different. So I think we need to go for, I mean, some of the work now deals with the specifics with e-commerce and with now artificial intelligence is being, looked at separately and so on. So going into more specificity in this area is really the way forward. I think not and go beyond the general, digitalization. And the second is really the issue of concept and measurement of different. I think this comes out as a major issue, not only on productivity, but only on the indicators of adoption of technology and how much, what is the potential, what is the actual, what is the coverage, and what is not the coverage, and so on. We have to be very careful about measuring the various. So the measurement itself I have been surprised by the extent to which there are lots of sources of data on this. And this is emerging. It's not all good and it's not all great, but it's evolving. And the multiplicity of sources, private sector is producing. It's not only government. It's not only the IoT. It's all kinds of sources where people who are producing these indicators and of digitalization. And we should be paying attention to this. And this is digitalization itself is changing the measurement of digitalization, if you like. It's important. Thank you.
Professor Bourguignon, do you have anything to add?
Not really. I mean, I think that indeed the productivity issue is an important issue. Thanks to Sharok for making the point about the difference between the aggregate and the sectoral. But when we talk about the slowing down of productivity gains, the issue of aggregation already existed in the past. So what we should really do is try to understand how the structure of the economy is changing at the same time as productivity gains by sector the structure of productivity gains by sector is changing. This is this co-relation between structural changes in these two dimensions that matters to understand what is going on at the aggregate level. Because after all, labor productivity at the aggregate level is the same thing almost as GDP per capita. So we are really talking about income growth.
Thank you so much. Do you like to add anything, Dr. Ahmed?
Just adding to what Sharok said regarding the issue of sectoral versus the macro, it's extremely important. But adding to that, within the sector itself, the value chain and the part of technology where it's introduced and adds to the complexity to identify how productivity gains can be achieved or not achieved. Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick point. I mean, something triggered by the first question in terms of just want to make the point about the importance of regulation. Yesterday we heard one presenter advocating for replacing fuel subsidy with internet subsidy, but I think it's important to note that the more affordability of the internet in all developed countries happen through competition. And I think this is one of the biggest problems in the region, so probably tackling crony capitalism can also help improving the access to technology. Another point about this gap between the fast individual adoption and the very slow, especially companies adoption that was highlighted in the study. As yesterday, the data was defined as the new oil. I mean, I think we must be aware that in the Arab state region, the new oil is being extracted by foreign companies and sold by foreign companies as well. And a very last point on productivity, I think it is necessary to start looking at productivity in a slightly different way to understand the impact of digital technologies compared to the literature available. Because, I mean, I can see the impact of digital technologies on my productivity. I am doing things much faster than I could do 20 years ago. it's not out. At the same time, I am doing so many more things just because of digital technologies that I would have never done. And this is, I think it's important. I mean, my responding to one email generates another 10 emails, which is a mystery, like the credit cards of your wife that are sucked up by the machines. And you know, it's me being on a Zoom call while I respond to emails and I text somebody, which again, has an impact on productivity, definitely not, I mean, bad impact on quality of work, but this is how most of the people that I know work nowadays. So perhaps also a different kind of what we measure as productivity of labor.
Thank you so much. I'm not going to attempt to wrap up this discussion. It was rich, it was diverse, it was an uncharted terrain for many of us. So I would like to conclude by thanking each and one of you, the authors and the commentators and the audience for your patience and for keeping you away from lunch. I know we're a few minutes late, so thank you so much. And I look forward for further analysis and concentration by ERF on this very important issue. Thank you.